goodness, what's happening?
Hello.
Hello.
Hi.
We do want to hang on one second. I'm going to make you larger.
And turn off the lights.
Dim the lights a bit so they can see you.
Turn around, Brett, so you don't have outline view next to the light.
I think you know a little bit about lighting.
There you go. We can see you.
There we go. So they can hear you, but I'm probably going to be relaying much of it because of some sound issues on this side of things. Okay, it's really good to see you. All right, I'm just going to open it up.
And I just want to say that I'm sorry I couldn't be there. I'm so disappointed to have missed all the great panels that everyone's been contributing to. I'm sure it's been totally amazing. And yeah, if my film wasn't screening in Toronto right this minute, I would absolutely be there. So I'm sorry about this, but I'm glad to be here with you via technology.
So how long do we have with you exactly?
We have between 20 and 30 minutes, so whatever works for you. Yeah.
Yeah, we have about 20 anyway.
Okay.
So, do you want to say anything before we turn over?
No, I'm happy to dive in. Yeah.
Q&A. Okay. Here we go. I think they're still a little overwhelmed, but
Okay, sure. Yeah, I mean, I don't know what you said as far as a preface to the project, but I'm happy just to talk a little bit about how it began.
yes.
Yeah, so and people will sit on their questions for a moment. So I started a PhD in geography a number of years ago, knowing that I wanted my dissertation work to be part of the thinking and development of a new film project. I had been working as a filmmaker before and wasn't exactly sure what that would be, but had been working on issues around incarceration and prison in Canada and the US for a really long time. And yeah, I think sort of started doing my research, which is very much about the way in which prison spaces themselves are restructured and have a restructuring effect on outside spaces. So sort of thinking more expansively about what counts as a carceral space and also the links between transformation in urban space, for example, and what's going on with the criminal justice system. But I also was really sort of intrigued and troubled by a kind of basic fact that we're all aware of, which is, that, obviously the sort of scale and size of the US prison system and the sort of sheer volume of prison cells and people locked up in cages at this moment in time. But the contrast between that and how increasingly inaccessible carceral spaces are, prison spaces are for people who are not either working in them or locked up. And so thinking about that as a methodological challenge for the researcher, but also as a media maker. I mean, what do you do? How do you represent the situation of incarceration when you can't actually get inside, or getting inside involves so many compromises? And sort of, it got me thinking about that as an actual opportunity to do something different within the realm of what I think of as prison cinema. Because, at the same time as their prisons are further away and harder to get access to, we're actually saturated. I mean, Michelle, your work is so much about this too, saturated with particular kinds of imagery around what prisons are all about. And often those images are sensational and even the sort of progressive kind of media production, good progressive prison documentaries, to my mind, tend to maybe engender sympathy for particular subjects that are being focused on, but still kind of trap us not only in the space of the prison set or the prison edifice, but trap us in a kind of thinking, or to my mind anyways, trap us in a kind of thinking, prisons as either successful or failed responses to the problem of crime. So this is kind of a long way of saying that these kinds of problematics really sort of went into my thinking about what a different kind of prison film might look like, and really had me thinking about what it might mean and what it might do to suggest that we look not at prison building itself, look everywhere. What it's sort of very sort of influenced by geography in general. How does asking questions about the geographic reach of a given subject help illuminate new ways of thinking about what system is about and who's implicated in it and what kind of work does it do.
Very good. Could you just briefly speak to it in relationship, not necessarily to your research, but your position as an abolitionist?
Sure, yeah. I mean, I think, so, I'm a geographer, but also have been working in social justice work for a long time. I'm very influenced by and inspired by the work of prison abolitionists who invite us to think of, not just a world without prisons, but a world without the kinds of relationships for which prisons get used as a solution. So, with Gilmore and other prison abolitionists will often say, that we need to think about prisons not just as a building over there, but as a set of relationships. And I've always wondered what that could mean and what it might inspire, not just in terms of academic work, but art form. So in some ways, this film was my attempt to think through in thematic form how prisons might be thought of. Not just how we might think of prisons as a set of relationships, but how thinking of prisons that way helps us actually come up with some new ideas and alternatives and actually imagine a world without prisons. So, I think it's very hard for people to think in abolitionist terms when they only think that prisons are a solution to crime. But if prisons are sort of capitulated, reimagined, or resituated as, in some areas, a job creation strategy, or in other areas, it's a consequence of a revenue-generating structure, then it actually becomes pretty easy to think of alternatives, right? So that's sort of how my politics as a prison abolitionist informed the project as a whole.
All right. We're going to open it up. We've got one here and one here. We'll start back here.
Yeah, I was wondering, how did she develop trust with so many people? How did they trust her? How did they come to trust her with representing their stories in the ways that they deem as accurate?
Okay. Trust. How did so many people come to trust you in terms of representing their stories?
Sure. I mean, my experience making films has been that people are pretty good at knowing when someone is speaking from a place of respect, when someone is really transparent about what they're doing, I very, very much believe in, at least attempting to build relationships before I go in with a camera or a crew. And, I also just think that people don't get asked hard and honest questions about how they imagine their lives as often as you might think. And when you do, this is why I really love doing this kind of work. Because it's as an opportunity to go to people who aren't in my immediate friend circle or social circle in some way, and instigate conversations about how they imagine the future and what in life is difficult for them, or what they might want that's different than what is. And when people, in my experience, just get asked those questions and they understand that the person asking them is coming from a place of respect and is being sort of honest about what they're up to, then they really respond. And so it actually wasn't, in some ways it wasn't that hard. I just really, I made sure everyone knew that what the project was about, where I was coming from, made sure I never filmed people without permission. Even in some of those lineup scenes, at the bus or in St. Louis, I would, people see a person with a camera, they don't know what's going on, and I'm very cognizant of how people feel fucked over a lot of the time by media. And so I always sort of walk up and down the line and explain what's going on, but also say if anyone doesn't want to be in the image, that's totally fine. Just let me know. And people respond, and I feel very grateful that everyone in the film was so generous with their time, and generous with their own, with what they shared about their lives.
Hi, Beth. This is Avi Grisman from Eastern Kentucky University.
Hi.
My question concerns the selection of the locations. Obviously, a lot of them make a certain amount of sense, but this could have been 15 landscapes or 20 landscapes. Can you talk a little bit about how you picked the ones that you did?
Sure, yeah. I mean, I sometimes joke in Q&As that it could have been the prison in 50 landscapes because, once you start asking questions about how the prison system, how the criminal justice system infiltrates, life on the outside, you realize it's sort of everywhere. And the selection process, I mean, it was a sort of mix of things. I mean, there were a lot of stories and threads and themes that I was sort of working through all at once, and some things just didn't pan out in terms of access. And so, I, for example, really wanted to do something about, have a scene that got people thinking about birthing in prisons and reproductive labor in the prison system, and was going to film with a group of prison doulas in Massachusetts, and that just sort of fell through and didn't happen in time to make it into the film, although maybe it'll be its own short. In other cases, it was important to me to both make a film that didn't pretend comprehensive, doesn't pretend to say this is like, this says everything about the reach of the carceral system, but at the same time offered not just sort of independent fragments of a whole, but pieces that would tie back to each other. So when I was thinking about an archival scene that had to do with the urban rebellions of the late 50s and the war on crime, that I could have decided to do that with any number of places in archival research. I deliberately decided to focus on Detroit because I knew I would have this contemporary Detroit sequence, and I wanted to be able to allow for some of the links between 67 and the contemporary situation to be made. And then in other occasions, there was just too much overlap. So I was filming with some dairy producers, some dairy farmers in upstate New York, and thinking about, in that case, the decline of the dairy industry and how so much of this farmland has been relinquished by farmers who can't make a living at it anymore, and being, resold for prison development. And in the end, that just was a bit too similar to the scene in Eastern Kentucky, even while it's a different geography and still very important. So it was sort of just a mix of, my research process was very extensive, and there's lots of stuff that didn't make it into the film. But I was trying to create something that would, claim just as a whole, and have momentum that would build out. And maybe some of those pieces that didn't make it into the final film will be their own short films that people can use or exist in another form.
And Jeff?
Congratulations on a brilliant film, just a brilliant film. And the only downside is makes me want to give up the written word. So my question is, how did you get the Quicken Loan people to let you go through? And did they feel afterwards that you'd sort of taken them, or that they'd been used? I mean, can you explain that part?
Michelle, can you repeat the question?
Sure. How did you get access to Quicken Loan? And did they feel like they had been taken?
Well, yeah, so for my earlier comments about being entirely transparent with all of my subjects. But it's okay. I think it's okay to have an exception when it comes to the very powerful. Like, I have a different set of ethics when it comes to in positions of immense power. So, and I'm also a little bit terrified still that they're going to find this, they're going to see this film and like sue me for everything I don't have, you know. They were very controlling, and I wasn't dishonest with them. How that scene came about actually was that I knew I wanted to have a scene about gentrification and revitalization and the securitization of property in downtown cores, and that, you know, I could have taken place, unfortunately, a lot of places. But I had read this story about a command center that, well, Dan Gilbert's real estate empire and mortgage empire, and read about a room in his the Quicken Loans headquarters that's just a command center with hundreds and hundreds of different monitors connected to thousands of security cameras positioned across his real estate holdings. And I thought, oh, that would be fantastic. I'll just plant my camera in this space, and the entire scene will just be, you know, that room as a kind of geography of security and surveillance. And I inquired, and they said in no uncertain terms that I would not be allowed to get access to that space. They invited me to take this tour, and I said, okay. And so you saw 7 minutes of what was a 3-hour tour. And Bruce Swartz, who's the man taking us on the tour, never stops talking. You were sick of him at the end of 7 minutes, like you imagine. And what I said was that, and it's not untrue, I didn't say I'm making a prison abolition film, but I did say I'm making a film about securitization and about community attempts to revitalize after periods of disinvestment, you know, which are themes in the film. And I'm just really interested in what you guys are doing here with all of these companies and the Quicken Loans and Bedrock Real Estate. And they said, okay, well, take our tour. They give the tour every day. Yeah, I mean, it's definitely one of those things that gives some people pause. It's more opaque than other scenes, but I think that there's a lot going on, and I'm happy if people enter it in different ways, because I do think, you know, to my mind, it's most centrally about the securitization of private property and real estate as a sort of like, you know, one of the most sort of intense and concrete forms of private property. But it's you know, it's also about the mortgage crisis, and Quicken Loans and its role in the subprime mortgage crisis, and the racial displacement, and you know, what police are used for, how police work with private security guards, and what is being safeguarded. And so I sort of, you know, as well as, you know, capitalist culture and the ridiculousness of their project. So it wasn't hard to get access, but I definitely was a little bit careful about what I said, and I had to feign great enthusiasm of what they're doing. So I'm not like honest.
We're a little bit over, Brett, but I'm going to try and squeeze in one more question. Some folks are going to be going to get ready for their meetings.
Okay.
Yeah, let's try one more.
Again, congratulations on a wonderful film. So much of the film has such a haunting, lonely visual and sonic aesthetic to it. I wondered if you could talk about how that emerged, or what your thoughts were on that.
Sure. I think I hit the question. Okay, so I'll try and be brief, but yeah, I mean, I sort of fundamentally was, you know, like, you know, I make art, and I think that this is a piece of art with politics. And one of the things I think art is capable of is, and what makes me excited about cinema is its capacity to both make strange the familiar and make familiar things that seem strange. And I wanted to play with both taking something that's so familiar or so normalized, like the prison system, and destabilizing it. You know, to suggest this hasn't always been this way. Human always had been. This is something that's been normalized, reified in the social landscape, but it could be otherwise. Like, what can cinema do to make that effect of incarceration strange again? Yeah. But at the same time, I also wanted to play with the sort of the familiar. So, you know, things like the lineup and the bus. I think it was really important for me when we started on the prison bus to use the images and the sonic experience to create something that felt sort of almost universal. Like we've all been on a night bus in the middle of an empty highway in the middle of the night, and it's a lonely experience and it's a meditative experience. You feel like you're everywhere, but you're nowhere. And I wanted to. I mean, it was important for me, especially as a white person who hasn't had direct experience with incarceration, to try and implicate people who don't think that they have anything to do with these structures. And so part of the sort of art form and capacity of the medium to me is to just create that sensorily, to create sensations of being sort of in spaces that both feel deeply familiar and have all sorts of feelings attached, but then radically sort of destabilize what we end up knowing that space is all about, finding out that bus isn't just any bus, but it's a very particular bus that takes people to visit their loved ones incarcerated upstate New York.
Beautifully accomplished.
I hope that answers the question a little bit.
Yeah.
Thank you for your time.
If you want a copy of the film, I can just, Michelle can pass on my email address, but
Okay.
hope things have been